All right, Coach. Game 6 of the World Series. You were there. Obviously, a lot of coverage and attention for this World Series this year. What was your experience like there?
Well, I think, as a baseball person, just to go to a World Series, my first World Series ever, first time I go to a World Series, Super Bowl or NBA final, quite an experience, and to experience it with your son, nonetheless, kind of a special, father-son, night for us. But and which one, what a World Series to go to, the Cubs and the Indians, two historical programs or organizations, and both with kind of a championship drought and a lot of subplots, but really an exciting time, and I think a night that my son Drew and I will always remember.
You visited with Chris Coghlan a little bit, one of your former players. How's he doing? Where is he at this point in his career?
Well, he's of course he's doing great.
Yeah.
He's a world champion, and the guy that really made it happen. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to get to the World Series if it wasn't for Chris. And about a year ago, he realized that one of my boys, Drew, is a huge Cubs fan, and he mentioned to me last year that if they made it to the World Series, that he would get us 2 tickets. And of course, last year they lost in the playoffs, and but my son always remembered that. But when we got to the point, we realized that those players, there's so much put on them, when they get to that point, because it happens very quickly. In a couple days, the World Series starts, and Chris has a huge family, and actually we had a conversation. I said, hey, don't worry about us. You got to take care of your family and win a world championship. And he said, I appreciate it. And of course, they got so many ticket requests. But after Game 5, they won in Chicago, I got a text that evening, which I didn't get till actually Monday morning, because it was so late after the game was over, that he said, hey, Coach, I got 2 extra tickets for Game 6 in Cleveland if you and Drew can make it. So, of course, the next day was a little crazy for us, trying to get a couple plane flights and a hotel room in Cleveland, for Game 6 of the World Series. But we managed to get there, and it was an awesome night. Chris is doing great, and we got a chance to speak to him for about 10 minutes prior to batting practice before Game 6, and just a kid that obviously any of your players, you're proud of them and all their successes once they leave here. But Chris, as I said, is just a great guy and a class act, and I think to not only think of us, but to share some time before one of the biggest games of his life, it made it a special moment.
I know you mentioned your son is a Cubs fan. Aside from wanting to see Chris do well, did you have a preference there in the Cubs and the Indians?
I think because of Chris, we rooting for the Cubs. I think my whole family, my wife's a big Cubs fan. We know Mickey Callaway, one of our former players here that played here before I got here, is the pitching coach for the Indians. So I think for the Ole Miss family, it was a win-win. But maybe that's the disappointing thing, is for both of those organizations. Somebody was going to kind of get that monkey off their back and really relish the moment of being world champions for the first time in a very, very long time. But one club was going to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and have to wait again for another year. But certainly excited for Chris and the Cubs.
Well, when a team gets down 3-1 in a 7-game series, there are those in the media, maybe fans, who would write off that team. Do coaches do that too?
No, not necessarily, and I think especially in this, it's a little different than most 3-1s in the sense that there was so much pressure, and I think you could see that when they were at Wrigley Field. There was so much pressure on the Cubs. The first World Series games there in a long, long time, and of course, a drought of over 100 years, and you could see, I think, after they won Game 5, what a relief it was to get back. So most people would think it was such a daunting task to go to the visitors or go to their opponent's, stadium, for games 6 and 7. But it may have, played into the Cubs' hands in the sense that they could kind of get away from that pressure. I'm sure to a man they would have much rather won it in Chicago. But I think for some different instances, it was probably better that they were on the road.